The unassuming woman in worn jeans and a faded cardigan silenced the room of elite mechanics as she identified the impossible problem plaguing the million-dollar race car in just a few seconds. How could a kindergarten teacher who'd been laughed out of every prestigious auto shop in the city possess the mechanical genius that had stumped the country's most celebrated automotive experts? Wrenches clinked against metal as Sarah Lawson pushed open the glass door of Prestige Auto, clutching the keys to her father's 1968 Corvette. Mechanics in crisp uniforms moved between lifted luxury cars while she stood unnoticed, her department store clothes making her invisible in this temple of automotive excellence. "Excuse me," Sarah said to the receptionist who continued typing without looking up. "I have an appointment for my Corvette." The woman finally glanced at Sarah's simple ponytail and worn cardigan. "Your husband couldn't make it?" "I'm the owner," Sarah replied, twisting the small gold pendant around her neck. Greg Thompson strode across the polished floor, wiping his hands on a pristine shop rag. At 42, he'd been featured in Classic Car magazine as the problem solver, the mechanic who could diagnose issues others missed. "Mrs. Lawson?" he asked, looking past her toward the door. "Miss," Sarah corrected gently. "And I'm the owner." Greg's smile dimmed. "Right. And what's the problem that stumped everyone else?" The way he emphasized everyone else dripped with confidence. "There's a whining noise that appears only at exactly 57 miles per hour. It starts suddenly and stops just as suddenly if I change speed by even 1 mile per hour." Greg chuckled, glancing at a younger mechanic who had wandered over. "Sounds like your speedometer might be off. Or maybe the car just doesn't like going 57. The younger man snickered. Sarah took a deep breath. "I've already checked the speedometer against GPS. I've looked at the transmission fluid, the differential." Greg held up his hand. "Let's leave the diagnosing to the professionals, shall we? Cars are complicated machines. It takes years of training to understand them properly." He turned to the younger mechanic. "Tim, take the Corvette for a test drive. Check for the usual attention-seeking noises lady drivers worry about." Melissa Parker, the service manager, had been watching the exchange with a frown. She approached as Greg walked away. "I apologize for that," she said quietly. "Can I get your phone number for when we've completed the diagnostic?" Sarah provided her information, noticing the NASCAR magazine on Melissa's desk. "Are you a racing fan?" Melissa brightened. "Yes. I worked in pit crew management before moving to service. My father was an engineer for Hudson Racing for 15 years, Sarah said. "Martin Lawson." Recognition flashed across Melissa's face. "Martin Lawson was your father? His cooling system redesign changed racing forever." Before Sarah could respond, Greg's voice boomed across the shop. "Melissa! Customer relations on your own time." Sarah left feeling slightly better, knowing at least one person might take her seriously. What no one realized was that inside Sarah's purse sat her father's worn leather journal documenting every modification and quirk of the Corvette, including custom parts he designed himself that no standard diagnostic would recognize. 2 days later, Sarah's phone rang during her kindergarten class's nap time. Greg's voice carried the smug satisfaction of someone who enjoyed delivering bad news. "Miss Lawson, we've completed our diagnostic. We can't find anything mechanically wrong. But the noise is probably just a harmonic vibration. These old cars make noises. Nothing serious. It never made this noise when my father—" Greg cut her off. "With all due respect, these classics develop personalities. You have 2 options: leave it for another week of specialized testing, which will be expensive, or accept that vintage vehicles sometimes make unexplainable sounds." Sarah gripped the phone tighter. "How expensive?" Greg named a figure that exceeded her monthly teacher's salary. "But I wouldn't recommend throwing good money after bad. If you want my professional opinion, you should consider selling it to someone who understands vintage vehicles. I might even know a buyer." "I'll pick it up tomorrow," Sarah said finally. Neither of them knew that this conversation would set in motion events that would shake the foundations of Prestige Auto, and the entire automotive community in Westfield. Golden afternoon light bounced off the Corvette's polished hood as Sarah drove it out of Prestige Auto's service bay. The reception area was packed with customers, mostly men in expensive suits examining engine parts on display like museum pieces. Greg had made a show of returning her keys. "Remember what I said about those noises, Miss Lawson? Nothing to worry about, just vintage car quirks. Call us if you decide to sell." Only Melissa had seemed genuinely apologetic, slipping a business card into Sarah's hand with her personal cell number scribbled on the back. Driving home with the windows down, Sarah waited until she hit 57 miles per hour. The whine started instantly, a high-pitched sound from beneath the center console. It wasn't loud enough to be dangerous, but to someone who loved this car, it was like hearing a loved one in pain. Inside her house, Sarah spread her father's journal across the kitchen table. Martin Lawson had documented everything about the Corvette in meticulous detail. 3 cups of coffee later, she found what she was looking for, an entry describing a harmonic resonance at highway speeds that Martin had traced to a custom transmission component he'd designed himself. For the first time in a year, Sarah unlocked her father's workshop. Dust particles danced in the flashlight beam as she moved through the space. Everything remained exactly as Martin had left it, tools laid out in perfect order, diagrams pinned to corkboards, and shelves of carefully labeled parts boxes. Sarah found the box labeled "That Trans Parts" and discovered neatly organized components, each wrapped in oiled cloth with handwritten tags. At the bottom lay a folder containing detailed drawings of the custom valve body he'd created. The solution became immediately clear. Martin had modified a standard valve body, but his notes indicated a slight miscalculation in the resonance characteristics. He'd created a revised design but never implemented it before his death. "One step at a time," she whispered, hearing her father's voice in her head. By dawn, Sarah had disassembled the transmission. 3 days later, working between school hours and late into the nights, she had reassembled everything with the modified valve body. The real test came when she took the Corvette onto the highway. Heart pounding, Sarah accelerated to 57 miles per hour and held her breath. Silence. The whine had disappeared completely. The phone call from Melissa Parker came unexpectedly the following day during Sarah's lunch break. "I've been thinking about your Corvette. Greg was so dismissive, and I looked up your father after you left. Martin Lawson was a legend. Did you find a solution?" Sarah hesitated before deciding to trust her. "I fixed it myself." "That's incredible," Melissa said. "Listen, Prestige is hosting their annual classic car show this weekend. Greg uses it to showcase successful restorations and bring in new clients." She paused. "He's been telling everyone about the unfixable Corvette as an example of why people shouldn't buy classics without expert guidance." "He's using my car as an example?" "Yes. And Thomas Reynolds will be there, the racing team owner. He's looking for a new specialty mechanic for his vintage collection. Greg's been campaigning for the job for months. And you think I should show up? I think someone needs to show him he's not the mechanical genius he pretends to be." After hanging up, Sarah stared at her father's pendant. The thought of public confrontation made her stomach tight. She was a kindergarten teacher, not someone who sought out conflict. Sarah registered for the car show that evening, listing Martin Lawson's 1968 Corvette with custom transmission modifications in the description. What she didn't know was that Greg had already promised Thomas Reynolds a private tour, highlighting his expertise with problem cars, with her Corvette featured as his prime example of problems that even the legendary Martin Lawson couldn't solve. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not just Sarah's mechanical knowledge, but her courage to stand up for her father's legacy in a world that had never taken her seriously. Cameras flashed across polished chrome as Sarah pulled her Corvette into the Prestige Auto parking lot. Crowds moved between rows of classic cars displayed for the annual show. Her hands trembled slightly on the steering wheel. This wasn't her world, public confrontations, car shows, proving herself to strangers. But her father's voice seemed to whisper that some battles were worth fighting. Sarah hadn't even finished parking when Greg spotted her from across the lot. His confident smile faltered for just a second before returning with practiced charm. He excused himself from a group of admirers and marched toward her, his custom-embroidered shirt announcing, "Head Judge," in bold letters beneath his name. "Miss Lawson," he called loudly. "I didn't expect to see you here. Having trouble with the Corvette again?" Several onlookers turned to watch. Sarah stepped out of the car, keys in hand. "Actually, no. It's running perfectly now." Greg's eyes narrowed. "Really? And what miracle made those noises disappear?" "I fixed the transmission valve body," Sarah replied calmly. "Turns out it was a resonance issue in my father's custom design." Greg laughed, playing to the gathering crowd. "Fixed it yourself? That's ambitious. Well, I'm afraid all participant spots were filled weeks ago." Melissa appeared beside them, clipboard in hand. "Actually, Sarah registered yesterday. I approved it myself." She handed Greg a paper. "She's in space 42, right at the center." Greg's jaw tightened. "Fine. But judging starts in 30 minutes. The car needs to be in position now." As Sarah drove to her designated spot, she noticed a tall, distinguished man watching her car with unusual interest. Thomas Reynolds wore no name tag. He didn't need one. Everyone in racing circles knew the owner of Reynolds Racing. While positioning her car, Sarah overheard Greg nearby, speaking loudly to a group that included Reynolds. "Perfect example of why amateurs shouldn't mess with classics. That Corvette came in making terrible noises. Custom transmission that not even my team could salvage. Some cars are just too far gone." Sarah busied herself with final touches on the Corvette's display, placing her father's original design sketches beside a photo of him in his racing days. Her heart hammered as she heard footsteps approach. "Interesting display," Thomas Reynolds said, studying the sketches. "Martin Lawson's work?" "Yes," Sarah replied. "He was my father." Reynolds nodded thoughtfully. "I remember Martin. Brilliant engineer. Turned down my job offer 3 times to stay with a smaller team. Said it was about loyalty, not money." Before Sarah could respond, Greg inserted himself between them. "Mr. Reynolds, I see you've found our problem child." He patted the Corvette's hood possessively. "This is the car I was telling you about, classic example of well-intentioned modifications gone wrong." Reynolds raised an eyebrow. "Miss Lawson was just telling me she's Martin's daughter." Greg's smile froze. "Really? Well, family connections aside, I've personally examined this vehicle. The transmission issues are beyond repair without complete replacement." Sarah felt a flush of anger but kept her voice steady. "Actually, I fixed the resonance problem 3 days ago." "Resonance problem?" Reynolds asked. "Yes," Sarah explained. "My father had designed a custom valve body that created harmonic vibration at exactly 57 miles per hour. I implemented his revised design from his notes." Greg's laugh held an edge of nervousness. "That's impossible. My team tested everything. There was no—" "Would you mind starting it up?" Reynolds interrupted, addressing Sarah. Sarah nodded and slid behind the wheel. The engine purred to life with a smooth, deep rumble that drew appreciative murmurs from nearby spectators. Reynolds leaned in through the passenger window. "Mind if I join you for a quick drive?" Greg stepped forward. "Mr. Reynolds, as head judge, I must advise against." "Just around the block," Reynolds said, already opening the passenger door. "I've been looking for someone who truly understands Martin Lawson's engineering philosophy for my collection." As Sarah pulled away with Thomas Reynolds beside her, she caught Melissa's subtle thumbs up in the side mirror. Greg stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed opportunity driving away without him. What Greg couldn't hear was the conversation unfolding in the Corvette, a conversation that would reverberate through Prestige Auto and the entire Westfield automotive community for years to come. Phones buzzed with notifications throughout Prestige Auto's customer lounge. Video clips of yesterday's car show confrontation spread across social media, most focusing on Greg Thompson's stunned expression as Sarah's Corvette, the same car he declared unfixable, won Best in Class for American Classics. "How did you do it?" asked the third customer of the day, who brought in a problematic classic car specifically requesting Sarah Lawson. "They said it was impossible to fix." Sarah glanced at the small office with her name freshly painted on the door. "Specialty Classics Consultant," still hardly believing Thomas Reynolds' offer after their test drive. Not just employment, but a partnership handling his vintage collection and client referrals. "Let me take a look," Sarah replied, accepting the keys. Greg appeared in the doorway, his former swagger diminished. Frank Wilson, the shop owner, had made it clear: work with Sarah or work elsewhere. 20 years of reputation undone by one woman with her father's notebook. "Need any help?" Greg asked stiffly. Sarah could have enjoyed his discomfort, could have dismissed him as he had dismissed her. Instead, she remembered her kindergartners and their daily lesson about being kind even when others weren't. "Actually, yes. This seems like one of those tricky Jaguar electrical systems you mentioned last week." Surprise flickered across Greg's face, followed by something resembling respect. He moved beside her, careful to maintain professional distance. "The trick with these is checking the ground connections first," he offered. Sarah nodded. "That's what I was thinking." Working together, they diagnosed the problem in half the expected time. Afterward, Greg lingered awkwardly by the toolbox. "I've been in this business 20 years, he said finally. "Nobody's ever made me look that wrong before." Sarah carefully wiped her hands. "I didn't come to the show to embarrass you. But I deserved it," Greg admitted. "I wasn't just wrong about the car. I was wrong about you." He hesitated. "How did you know to check the valve body? Most mechanics wouldn't even consider that." Sarah pulled her father's journal from her work bag. "I had help." Greg's eyes widened as he recognized Martin Lawson's distinctive handwriting. "This is gold. Decades of problem solving from one of racing's best minds." "It's more than that," Sarah said. "It's his voice when I need it most." A customer appeared at the garage door, Thomas Reynolds, surprisingly without appointment. He carried an unusual metal part wrapped in cloth. "Sarah, sorry to interrupt, but I need your expertise on something from the McLaren." Greg stepped back, assuming he was being dismissed, but Reynolds addressed him directly. "You're Thompson, right? The diagnostic specialist? I'd like your input too. Sarah tells me you have an ear for identifying unusual engine sounds." The surprise on Greg's face mirrored what Sarah had felt during their first meeting, being unexpectedly valued for expertise after being dismissed. In the following weeks, Prestige Auto underwent subtle but meaningful changes. Frank Wilson, seeing the business opportunity, created a specialty classics division, with Sarah and Greg as reluctant co-leads. Their combined approaches, her inherited engineering insight and his years of practical experience, attracted clients from 3 states away. Melissa, over coffee with Sarah one morning, observed the transformation. "You know what's remarkable? You didn't just fix that valve body. You fixed this whole place." Sarah watched through the window as Greg patiently explained to a young female customer exactly why her father's old Mustang made that particular noise. No condescension, no gender assumptions. "My dad used to say the hardest part to fix in any car is the owner's misconceptions," Sarah replied. "Sometimes the people who seem most confident need the biggest adjustments." The bell chimed as another customer entered, a teenage girl in worn jeans clutching keys to an old pickup truck. The receptionist automatically pointed her toward Greg, but he redirected her. "This is Sarah Lawson," he explained. "If there's something seriously wrong with your truck, she's the one who'll figure it out. Best engineer in the state." Sarah extended her hand to the girl, recognizing her own past reflection in those uncertain eyes. The simple woman once ignored by expert mechanics hadn't just fixed an impossible problem, she'd created space for others like her to be seen, heard, and respected in a world that had been designed to overlook them. What she couldn't yet know was that the lessons learned at Prestige Auto were only the beginning of a journey that would eventually reshape the entire classic car restoration industry, with a kindergarten teacher at its unlikely helm. Lightning cracked across the sky as Sarah stepped to the podium marked Women in Automotive Symposium. 600 faces looked back at her, mechanics, engineers, shop owners, and students from across the country. Just 6 months earlier, she'd been teaching finger painting to 5-year-olds. Now industry publications called her the accidental revolutionary, reshaping car restoration culture. 247. Sarah began, holding up a thick folder as another lightning bolt illuminated the convention center windows. That's how many emails I've received from women sharing stories of being dismissed by mechanics who assumed they couldn't possibly understand their own vehicles. Television cameras tracked her movement across the stage as Sarah described how Prestige Auto's Specialty Classics division had evolved into a training program with women comprising 60% of their apprentices. Their success with Unfixable Classics had earned them a 3-month waiting list for appointments. In the front row, Melissa Parker, now operations director, smiled encouragingly beside several of Sarah's former kindergarten students who'd begged their parents to attend. Thomas Reynolds stood against the back wall, arms crossed with quiet pride. But someone was missing. Greg Thompson hadn't been seen since resigning from Prestige 3 weeks ago after increasingly heated disagreements with Frank Wilson about the shop's new direction. The problem was never just with my car, Sarah continued, making eye contact with a young woman furiously taking notes. It was the assumptions made about who belongs in automotive spaces and whose knowledge counts. After her standing ovation, Sarah retreated backstage where a line formed for her to sign copies of her new book, The Problem Solver's Handbook. Each person shared a story similar to her own, being underestimated, dismissed, or charged extra for basic services because they didn't fit the expected profile of someone who understood cars. As the line dwindled, a volunteer rushed up, whispering urgently in her ear. "Vernon Wallace is here with his lawyers. He's demanding to speak with you." Sarah's stomach tightened. Wallace owned 5 dealerships and presided over the State Automotive Association. He'd publicly questioned her credentials last week, suggesting in trade publications that her success came from feminine charm rather than genuine technical knowledge. "Send him to the green room," Sarah replied. "I'll meet him there after the last signing." 20 minutes later, Sarah entered the private room to find Wallace. Tall, silver-haired, with the practiced smile of someone who closed million-dollar deals weekly. 3 men in expensive suits flanked him like bodyguards. "Miss Lawson," Wallace called loudly, though they were the only people present. "Quite the fan club you've gathered. My technical team has reviewed your famous valve body repair." His tone made "famous" sound like an insult. "They have some questions about your methodology. If you don't mind a little professional scrutiny." Sarah recognized the trap immediately. Technical questioning designed to expose gaps in her knowledge. She had faced similar tactics from competitors trying to prove she was just Martin Lawson's daughter, rather than a legitimate expert in her own right. "I'm always happy to discuss technical details," Sarah replied calmly. "But first, I believe you have something that belongs to me." Wallace's smile faltered slightly. "Excuse me?" "The 1972 Dodge Charger you're restoring. License plate TRL 329. Sarah watched recognition flash across his face. "My father's experimental project car, sold by mistake after his death by a confused family friend. I recognized it from the photos in your dealership advertisement." Color drained from Wallace's face. The car was his centerpiece acquisition, advertised as having unknown but significant racing history. The men with him exchanged uncomfortable glances. "That car was purchased legally through an estate sale," Wallace stated, recovering quickly. "I don't dispute that," Sarah said evenly. "But it contains my father's experimental fuel injection system. His research notebooks on it are missing several crucial pages. The pages, I believe, are still in the glove compartment." The gathered lawyers had grown silent, sensing conflict beyond their understanding. Wallace's expression hardened. "You have no proof of these claims." "Actually, she does." Greg Thompson stepped through the side door, his former cockiness replaced by quiet determination. He approached carrying a tablet displaying technical drawings. This is Martin Lawson's micro-stamping pattern, Greg explained, turning the screen toward Wallace. Every component he designed carried it, invisible unless you know exactly where to look. I've documented identical stamps on parts in the Charger's fuel system. Wallace stared at Greg with genuine shock. Thompson? What the hell are you doing here? We had an agreement. Pieces suddenly connected in Sarah's mind. Greg's resignation, Wallace's technical ambush, the missing research pages. Greg's next words confirmed her suspicions. Sarah asked me to verify her claims privately after spotting the car in your showroom. Greg lied smoothly. I've spent 3 weeks examining the components, comparing them to her father's known work. It's unmistakable. The system in that car is Martin Lawson's unreleased design. Sarah kept her expression neutral, though her mind raced. Greg wasn't being honest. She had never asked him to investigate Wallace. So why was he helping her now? When I resigned from Prestige, Greg continued, meeting Sarah's gaze briefly. It wasn't because I couldn't work with you. It was to track down your father's missing designs. I owed him that much. Wallace's face reddened as he realized his technical trap had backfired spectacularly. This is outrageous. You have no right. If you'd like to discuss returning my father's research pages, Sarah interrupted calmly, I'd be happy to authenticate the car's pedigree officially. That would significantly increase its value for your showroom. Wallace's expression shifted from anger to calculation as he processed this unexpected offer. Perhaps we could discuss a mutually beneficial arrangement. My showroom could feature the Lawson connection prominently. My father's research notes first, Sarah insisted. They're irreplaceable. What Wallace couldn't know was that this confrontation wasn't about ownership or credit. Hidden in those missing pages was the final puzzle piece of Martin Lawson's revolutionary fuel efficiency system, one that could transform classic cars from gas-guzzling relics to viable daily drivers in an eco-conscious world. As Wallace stepped into the hall to consult with his lawyers, Sarah turned to Greg. You knew my father? Greg hesitated, then nodded. Summer internship, 1998. I was nobody, just a kid obsessed with cars. Something vulnerable crossed his face. He taught me more in 1 week than my entire first year of technical school. Why didn't you ever say anything? Would you have believed me? Greg asked quietly. After how I treated you? Before Sarah could answer, Wallace returned, his lawyers notably absent. My attorneys suggest a cooperative approach might be prudent. The research notes for official authentication of the vehicle's pedigree. But I want exclusive rights to implement any technologies found in those notes. Sarah shook her head. My father never wanted his work monopolized. His designs were meant to be shared. She paused. But I could offer you first implementation, if you agree to sponsor 10 scholarships for women entering automotive training programs. The expression that crossed Wallace's face, surprise, calculation, and grudging respect, marked the beginning of a negotiation that would extend far beyond a single car or missing notebook pages. It was the moment when Sarah's vision began to expand from fixing cars to fixing the system that determined who got to work on them. As reporters pressed against the door, sensing a story, Sarah caught Greg's eye across the room. The nod they exchanged acknowledged something neither had expected, that sometimes the most valuable allies emerge from the most unlikely adversaries, when united by respect for something larger than themselves. Frost coated the windows of Martin's Motors on grand opening day. Sarah arrived hours before the scheduled ceremony, needing this quiet moment alone. She unlocked the front door of the converted warehouse, flipping the lights to reveal what 6 months of renovation had accomplished. Her father's humble home workshop transformed into a state-of-the-art restoration facility and education center. Martin Lawson's original workbench remained the heart of the space, now preserved under glass but surrounded by equipment that would have amazed him. Computer diagnostic systems, a small dynamometer, specialized tools shipped from 3 countries. In the corner, 20 student workstations waited for the first restoration class scheduled to begin next week. Sarah placed her father's pendant in a small display case alongside his racing photos, trophies, and engineering patents. 1 year had transformed her life completely, from dismissed customer to industry innovator. Nervous? Melissa asked, arriving with coffee and pastries despite the early hour. Her baby bump now made her movements more deliberate. As Prestige Auto's former manager, she'd surprised everyone by leaving to help Sarah launch this new venture. Terrified, Sarah admitted, accepting the largest coffee. What if nobody comes? Melissa laughed. The waiting list for consultations is already 3 months long. Thomas Reynolds is bringing half the racing community. And 22 students have paid deposits for your first restoration class. The doorbell chimed unexpectedly. Greg Thompson entered stomping snow from his boots, carrying a flat package wrapped in brown paper. His partnership with Sarah tracking down her father's legacy projects had evolved into something neither had anticipated: genuine respect. You're early, Sarah observed, eyeing the package. Wanted to get this to you before the circus begins. Greg handed her the parcel. Found it cleaning out my storage unit last night. Sarah unwrapped it to find a framed photograph from 1998. Her father in racing coveralls with his arm around a teenage boy she barely recognized as Greg. Both were grinning, covered in grease, standing beside an engine on a test stand. That was the day your dad let me help tune the Hudson prototype. Greg explained, something like reverence in his voice. He treated me like I had something to contribute, not just some kid in the way. I'd never experienced that before. Sarah studied the image, her father's easy smile, Greg's eager expression. Why did you treat me so differently when I came to Prestige? Greg's shoulders sagged slightly. Because I was ashamed. Your father saw something in me, but instead of becoming the kind of mechanic who helps others, I became exactly what he warned me against, someone who uses knowledge to make others feel small. He met her eyes directly. Working with you these past months, it's been like getting a second chance to learn from Martin Lawson. Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Vernon Wallace, who entered carrying a leather binder. After their confrontation at the symposium, he'd reluctantly returned Martin's research notes. What he hadn't expected was Sarah's counteroffer: partnership implementing her father's eco-friendly modifications across Wallace's vintage inventory. The press is setting up outside, Wallace reported, nodding stiffly at Greg. The men's relationship remained strained, former conspirators now working from opposite sides of an industry divide. By mid-morning, the parking lot overflowed with visitors. Under a heated tent sat the culmination of months of work, 2 identical 1968 Corvettes. One was Sarah's original. Beside it stood its twin, modified with Martin Lawson's complete fuel efficiency system reconstructed from the recovered research notes. Between them stood testing equipment displaying emissions and consumption metrics in real time. Television cameras rolled as Sarah explained her father's vision: classic cars preserved not just as showpieces but as daily drivers, updated with hidden modifications that maintained their original character while reducing their environmental impact by nearly 40%. This isn't about proving anything anymore, Sarah concluded. It's about honoring our automotive heritage while embracing a sustainable future. As the demonstration began and the metrics displayed the remarkable improvement, Sarah noticed a disturbance at the back of the crowd. A young woman in worn jeans argued with security, clutching a folder of papers. Please, I just need 5 minutes, the woman insisted. I drove all night to get here. Sarah signaled security to let her through. The young woman approached nervously, her expression a mixture of determination and doubt that Sarah recognized immediately. Ms. Lawson? I'm Rachel Wilson. She twisted a bracelet on her wrist. My dad owned Wilson's European Auto before he passed away last year. I grew up helping him, but our customers keep leaving now that he's gone. They don't believe a 23-year-old woman can handle their cars. Understanding dawned on Sarah's face as Rachel continued, showing photos of meticulous electrical work on her phone. I saw your speech online about being underestimated, Rachel explained. I thought maybe, I don't know, that you might understand. Sarah saw in Rachel's determined expression her own reflection from a year earlier, someone fighting to be taken seriously in a world that had already decided her limitations. What's your specialty? Sarah asked. Electrical systems and European classics. Dad trained me since I was 12. Greg had wandered over, examining the photos with professional interest. These harness modifications are excellent, he said, his tone genuinely impressed. We've been looking for someone with European electrical experience for our restoration team. His voice held none of the condescension he'd once shown Sarah. Any chance you'd be interested in interviewing? Rachel's eyes widened. Seriously? I mean, yes. As they discussed details, Sarah stepped back, catching Melissa's knowing smile across the crowd. They both recognized what was happening, the cycle continuing, another person getting the chance that Sarah had once fought so hard for. Later that evening, after the crowds departed and the press packed up their cameras, Sarah sat alone at her father's workbench. She opened his journal to a page he'd written just months before his death. The greatest machine we can build is opportunity, he'd written in his precise engineer's hand. And the finest tool is confidence given to those who've been told they don't belong. Sarah ran her fingers over his handwriting, feeling not just his legacy but her own taking shape alongside it. The kindergarten teacher once dismissed by expert mechanics hadn't just fixed an impossible problem, she'd begun fixing an entire industry's perspective, one valve body, one apprentice, one mind at a time. Outside her window, twin Corvettes sat gleaming under newly installed security lights, identical on the outside but fundamentally different within. Like Sarah herself, transformed not by changing her appearance to fit others' expectations, but by revealing the extraordinary capabilities that had been there all along, waiting for the right moment to prove their worth.